gotta worry in the world you're leaving. Maybe take good care of yourself, please stay where the wind blows, where the river meets the sea. I'll be waiting for the day when you come back to me. I'll be waiting.
Hello, I'm Andrew Price. I've been practicing the skills of bushcraft since I was about 8 years old. And now I run Dryad Bushcraft, which gives me the opportunity to teach other people the skills that I've learned along the way. Bushcraft is nothing new. It's been a way of life for people for thousands of years. More and more people are spending their time going out learning the skills of bushcraft. But what is bushcraft? Well, for me, bushcraft is the skills that enable me to be comfortable in the outdoors using the minimum amount of equipment. In addition to a knife, a good solid axe is a very useful tool to have for bushcraft. Now the axes I use are made by Gränsfors Bruks in Sweden, and you even have the maker's initials stamped into the blade here, Lennart Peterson. Now a small forest axe is about the size of my fingertips to my elbow in length, which makes it very useful. It can be put into a rucksack and it can be carried. It's not too heavy. Now I'm going to split this piece of wood for making a spoon. And the position I'm in here, if I slip, all that's going to happen is it'll hit the log. So what I'm doing is just shaping the handle of the spoon now. And an axe really does take a lot of the effort out of carving. A job that would take an hour with a knife could be done in about 20 minutes with an axe. Another thing with an axe is that you can hold it in a lot of different ways. So as well as using it as a splitting tool by holding it at the end of the handle, you can hold it further towards the head, which reduces the amount of leverage you have, but it increases the amount of control you have over the blade. You can even hold the head of the axe and use it in this way for some very fine carving, and possibly even use it to replace a knife. One of the problems with a small forest axe is because of its short handle length. If you try to use it in a standing position, it'll just come into your leg. So a good way to avoid that is to stand astride a piece of wood. So I've raised it up just an inch or so on another piece. Position it so that the front of the log you're trying to split is level with your ankles. And then we need to deliver a short, sharp blow. In order to sharpen an axe, I use this. It's a small steel, a diamond hone. And basically it's a piece of steel that's impregnated with industrial diamonds, and if you look very closely in the sunlight you can see it twinkling, and these are these miniature diamonds. So as we rub our blade against the metal surface, the metal's worn away, exposing the tips of these diamonds. And the way to use it is to very carefully, running in very small circles, just aim to take a very small amount of metal off each time. You have to be extremely careful when you're using this technique that you don't reach the end of the stone and cut your finger, but as long as you take your time you shouldn't have any problems. So once you've done one side of the blade, you can then turn it over and start working on the other side. So the object of friction firelighting is to rub two pieces of wood together and generate friction. So friction being the force that creates heat when we rub our hands together, just like this. So the same principle is employed in lighting a fire. So by rubbing these two pieces of wood, this piece of hazel and this piece of ivy together, we generate friction. That friction breaks down the wood, and then when the wood breaks down into a very fine dust that we call a coal, it will eventually start to smoulder. Now the wood we'll use today for the bow drill method will be a drill made from hazel and a hearth made from ivy. We're also going to use a bearing block. This is a piece of holly that's been split and then had a small depression carved in it using the tip of a knife. Now any wood will do for that. I normally use green wood, but today I'm going to use a limpet shell. We're very close to the coast here, so limpet shells are quite common. If we didn't have a limpet shell, we could always use green leaves mashed up in there, or possibly even a slug. Those very small slugs you find in the garden, mash one of those up, and that really helps to keep the drill spinning. Another thing we'll need is a bow. Now this is made from holly, but you can use any wood that has a little bit of a curve to it. So the first thing we need to do is to create a fireboard or hearth. So I'm taking this piece of ivy and I'm just going to flatten both sides out. I've actually made a start, so cheating a little bit today. So I'm just going to flatten the both sides out using the knife. Always important to be cutting away from yourself. And we can use these shavings later on. Using the tip of the knife, I'm just going to cut some small semicircles. And the only reason we're doing this is just so that the drill stays in one place when we start to drill. Okay, that's the hearth board ready to go. The next thing we need to do is to shape the drill. Now I've chosen a piece of wood that's fairly straight anyway, but if you look along it, you'll always see a few imperfections. Now if we can get this drill as straight as possible, it'll spin perfectly. If we have any wibbles in it, it'll spin and create a hole that's bigger than we actually need and allow cold air to get in and interfere with the fire lighting process. So I'm just going to take the bark off. So I'm going to make it quite pointy this end, and that's fine. Now the end that we want to generate the maximum amount of friction, we put a bit of a rounded end onto that. So this is probably the most important thing of friction fire lighting, is to get that good stable position to work from. So being right-handed, I'm going to put my left foot on the board. That allows me to put my weight straight down onto the work as I'm going. And now we take the drill. Now my favourite way to put the drill into the bow is to hold it with the point towards the palm of my hand, drop the string down onto the top, and then twist it in. It should be fairly tight. If it's too hard, you may find it just flicks out, and if it's too slack, it'll slip on the drill. So it needs to be just tight enough that when you pull it into position, it takes a fair bit of effort. And then once it's in position, it'll feel quite comfortable. Another little tip is to hold the string so that you can apply extra tension if it starts to slip. It's quite a useful technique. Now here's the bearing block with a limpet shell to reduce friction. Now if we didn't have a limpet shell, we could mash up some green leaves, put some wax, or even a small slug, anything to just lubricate this bearing block and allow this to spin freely. So luckily we have a limpet shell, which is about the best way to lubricate this end. Now getting into position, this is where it's really important to get your position right to begin with, because if you find your position's wrong, it'll be very uncomfortable and you probably will give up before you actually create a coal. So I'm just going to get started slowly. Now if you notice, my left arm is pulled tightly into my left leg. That gives it extra stability and extra strength, and it means I can hold the bearing block solidly and I can apply downward pressure without wibbling around. I'm just speeding up a little bit. You can probably see a small amount of smoke already. Okay, and that's the point we stop at. Now the reason we stop here is because there's one crucial ingredient missing from this. So we've created the depression, we've shaped the end of the drill, and we've shaped the hearth. But the thing we're missing is a notch. Now without a notch in the side here, all the dust will collect around the outside of the hole and it'll cool down and we won't actually light a fire. So I need to cut a notch into the side of the hearth, and the notch should be about 1/8 of the hole. There we have a glowing coal. And very carefully place the coal into the tinder bundle. Right, now this is where we just allow it to grow a little bit, just put some oxygen in. It always helps to have the wind coming from behind you, and it helps to keep the oxygen flow running through the tinder bundle. And it also stops the smoke blowing in your face, which is definitely worth considering. And there we have fire by friction. One of the most useful things we could have in the outdoors is cordage, or string to you and me. Now cordage can be made from a lot of different things. This particular one's made from willow bark. So what we need to do is strip the bark off a willow tree and use that to make the cordage, and I'll show you how to do it. So this comes away very, very easily. And once we've got it a little bit free, it should all come off in one piece, which makes it absolutely perfect for making natural cordage. Once that's been boiled for an hour or so, what you're left with is this stuff. And it's still pretty stiff, but it's as we break it up, get the fibers separated, it'll get very soft and it makes great string. So we need to keep working at that. Just moisten your fingers slightly, give it a twist. So I always twist clockwise initially, and then fold it back over itself. So that's what we have. Looks a bit tricky to start with. You could wrap that around something to make it easier to begin. So we get another piece, run it alongside the short piece. And then we just incorporate the two. Yeah, it's a little bit on the stiff side, this stuff, but it'll be very strong. The whole reason this doesn't come unraveled is because of the way it's twisted. So what you do is you get two bunches, and the first one you twist very firmly in a clockwise direction, and then you wrap that over the other piece. So you're twisting and then wrapping back, twisting clockwise, wrapping over anti-clockwise. And you just keep doing that to pull it together so it won't unravel. So it can be a sort of self-perpetuating piece of string. If we try to drink water from a British stream nowadays, there's a very good chance we'll end up with an upset stomach, or even worse. So it's really important that if you're spending time in the outdoors and intend to drink water from streams, that you take something with you to purify the water. It could be something as simple as a millbank bag and a billy can to boil the water, or a high-tech water filter costing hundreds of pounds. Now this little beauty's a Swiss-made Katadyn pocket filter, probably one of the best water filtration devices money can buy. But they're not cheap. So unless you're planning on really doing a lot of outdoor activities, it's maybe not the best investment. But if you do intend to spend a lot of time outdoors, something like this can really make life a lot easier. And what we have is a ceramic filter impregnated with silver. And that actually uses 0.001 micron filtration to filter out everything from bacteria and parasites right through. And we need to keep the bottom of this pipe off the bottom of the stream, where it'll pick up loads of sediment and very quickly block the filter. So if we can somehow suspend it up or ask somebody to hold it for you, just to keep the end of this away from the bottom of the stream. And now what we do is start very gently pumping. You don't need to force this. If it feels hard to push, you need to take the filter out and give it a little scrub to clean off any debris, and it should start to work just fine again. Now a filter like this should filter about 50,000 litres of water before you need to replace the cartridge. A very useful piece of kit. In order to stay warm in the woods, we need to keep ourselves warm by lighting a fire. To light a fire, we have to collect wood. That wood requires energy in the form of energy from our muscles, which we fuel through food. That food has to be collected. So this is the vicious circle. Makes us realize why energy is so vital for our survival. And when we live in a normal world, in a suburban world where we can flick a switch and turn on the TV, boil a kettle, everything becomes so simple. But in reality, all this energy comes from somewhere, and that somewhere is oil. Today we'll be speaking to Paul Allen from the Centre for Alternative Technology at Cutthroat in mid Wales.
We in the developed West now have an appallingly bad attitude to energy. It's rooted in the 1920s and the 30s when oil was literally cheaper than water. All the major industrialised countries were awash with energy. So we designed our industrial and our living systems quite literally to use as much energy as possible. The way we sited the suburbs, the taking up of the light railways, the way we designed our houses, because energy was cheap and nobody saw any limits to the growth in energy demand. But now in 2008 we realise that the North Sea oil has peaked. In fact, if you look at most of the oil-producing countries, a great many of them have peaked, and particularly the big producers in the Saudi area, if they've peaked, then probably the world has peaked.
Photovoltaic panels can be used to generate electricity using the energy from the sun. In bushcraft, we have another means of obtaining the energy that we need: trees. Trees use a process known as photosynthesis to convert the sun's energy into growth. When a tree dies, we can then use it for fuel. And by burning it, we release the chemical energy that the tree put away all those years before. Firelighting is such an important skill that I think it's worth coming back to it and looking at some of the more basic techniques that we can use for firelighting, especially in the winter months. At the moment, we've had a slight dusting of snow, so the ground cover and any possible kindling on the ground is very likely to be damp. So that leaves us with the option of looking above ground. Thin birch twigs like these, about the thickness of a match, are the perfect kindling, so I'm just going to collect a really nice bundle of these. And there's plenty on it. This is just the one tree and I've probably got enough to get a fire going just off this. Now the silver birch is a great source of natural tinder, and the peeling bark, which comes away as the tree grows, it sheds its bark much as a snake sheds its skin, and this bark can be peeled away and makes an excellent source of tinder. Now the reason it's such a good firelighting material is because it's so rich in resin and oil, so it burns with a very, very oily orange flame. And before we start to light a fire, we need to select a good spot that's safe to light a fire in. Now the things we're looking for is a lack of overhead cover, so we don't want any tree branches that could ignite if the fire gets quite big, and also we want to make sure that the ground it's on won't continue to burn long after we've left. And that means we're looking for bare mineral soil, which is proper earth, not the kind of decaying vegetable matter you find in, say, pine forests and that sort of thing. Now we're going to have a small fire, so we don't need to clear a huge area today. And now we need to set up a platform of small pieces of dry wood. And the reason for this is that the ground is very damp, and if we light a fire directly on the ground, it will draw moisture up into the thermal column and it will reduce the efficiency of the fire, and it may even stop it from burning altogether. I always keep at least 3 or 4 different methods of lighting a fire with me, so that normally includes something like this, which we've already looked at, which is the Swedish fire steel, or a ferro rod, which is an alloy of 11 different metals which, when struck with a knife, creates a big shower of white hot sparks. These are really effective, and also they'll work even if they've been immersed in water. Now these are really useful as well because A, they can be used for fire lighting very effectively, and they're very reliable. You can just give them a shake after they've got wet and they're usable again, and even if the fuel's all gone, you can still use the spark to ignite tinder. When it's been really damp, as it quite often is here in Wales, I like to use little pieces of cycle inner tube like this. Now these are a last ditch method. They smell horrible, but they are very effective, so once you've got one burning, it continues to burn and it will ignite. Another thing I like to keep with me is some pieces of cotton wool soaked in Vaseline, and to use it I just fluff it up. We can then ignite it using the fire steel. Now that we've ignited our cotton wool, we're slowly going to start to build the fire up using the driest pieces of kindling that we have. Now if we have any nice pieces of dry birch bark, that's always a good way to start things off as well, so I'm just going to throw a few of those in here just to get your early stage kindling going. I try not to crowd the fire too much at this stage as well, because by just putting small pieces of very, very dry kindling on, we can ensure that we're putting them on in exactly the right place. If you just start piling it on, sometimes you can smother the fire. I like to use the expression to build a fire, and it really is that, it's building. You're not constructing the fire before you light it, as some people do. You actually start off with good solid foundations and then you work up. It's always worth remembering the rule of fire lighting that we call the fire triangle. Now the fire triangle is the principle that dictates that a fire can only light if we have three things. Now those three things are firstly heat, which we've got from our lighter or our sparks or through friction. We also have fuel, which is our material, our tinder and our wood that we're burning. Now the last thing, and just as important, is oxygen or air, which is all around us, but occasionally you need to help things along, so that's why we blow the fire in the early stages occasionally, just to get more oxygen into it and allow it to burn effectively. Now you see this is drawing very well, so it's actually sucking oxygen into the thermal column along the bottom, into the flames where the fuel is being consumed, and then it's rising out. And it will continue to do that as long as we keep putting fuel on. I'm at the Wilderness Gathering in Wiltshire, the UK's biggest festival of bushcraft and survival skills. All the main schools teaching bushcraft and survival techniques are here, and there are thousands of people coming just to learn new things.
Well, here really is, normally in the bushcraft world we're trying to blend into the environment, you know, we're tracking our animals, we're trying to not disturb nature too much. Here we want to be going, help. So a few techniques really to identify, to help the search and rescue teams or anybody else that's wandering around in the area, to help them recognise that you're actually in trouble and you need help.
Dominic and myself, we actually started the gathering. The whole idea of it was just to create an environment for a weekend where everyone who's interested in bushcraft and wilderness skills could get together and share skills and experiences, and create a place where they could meet up with other people to book on courses or source their kit. But the very first gathering was a very personal kind of event. It was just a few hundred people, 97% male, grown-up male, and now, I mean, just listen to the background noise, it's families, and that's really good because it means we've got, you know, new generations of people interested in bushcraft and whole families. And that's what we want. We want to spread the word and have other people enjoy it.
Quite interesting look at hazelnuts. They can actually tell you what animals are around in the locality. You don't have to see any tracks on the ground. You can just look at the way that the nuts have been opened and been fed on to know what animals are there. And what we have here, this one is quite special. This is an example of a nut opened by a dormouse. And on this one you can see how the hole is almost circular.
The Wilderness Gathering has been growing every year in response to a massive interest from the public. Many people now really want to learn more about bushcraft and survival skills and primitive techniques that people used to use.
The Bushcraft magazine, its strapline is reconnecting to the landscape, and that's a very important thing to us. It's a fun magazine, it's full of ancient knowledge, touching peoples, bringing out knowledge that's been in the oral tradition and somehow been lost. A little spiritual element to it as well. And Steve has a great range of skills, and the two of us together, we make this thing work. We've had a lot of very positive reaction to our magazine here. So the gathering, G for gathering, it's been very important for us.
We've just come across this patch of grass. I suppose to thousands of people that's all it is, just grass. But if you look along here, you can see areas where the grass has been flattened, and this is called flagging. And in this light, as you can see, it shines up quite bright. And the beauty with this as well is the flagging actually gives us an example of which way the people were travelling. So if it's grass, always points to the way that the person's travelling. So this means nothing to a lot of people, but to somebody tracking somebody, maybe in a search and rescue situation, this sort of information could be a lifesaver.
Because everything that we know today has come from our ancestors from, you know, at least 10,000 years back. I mean, you can take it back a bit further if you want, but everything here for our survival was out there and is still out there. It's easy to forget it, but what we're trying to do is rediscover it.
Bushcraft is, I think it's just the enjoyment of primitive living skills or wilderness skills and handicrafts. That's my favourite bit, is the handicrafts. But it's, I think the whole idea for me of bushcraft is it gives people self-confidence, because once they know that they can do everything for themselves, they can go anywhere and just feel comfortable knowing that, you know, should they need to, they can fix things or fix their lives. You're actually sort of living in the woods and, hey, I'm not a worry, I don't need a tent, I can do this, and I can light my fire, I can make my tools. It's just self-confidence.
Bushcraft has been growing in popularity for several years now, and this is by far the biggest wilderness gathering we've seen yet. There are literally thousands of people here sharing skills, buying new toys, and just enjoying the experience of learning new things. The ability to signal or communicate under a survival situation could be a lifesaver. There are a whole host of ways of accomplishing the act of signalling distress, from whistles to create sound signals, rifle shots, possibly using a mirror like this to reflect sunlight, many things. First one would be a whistle. The international emergency distress signal is 6 blasts in quick succession. Followed by a gap, and then another 6 blasts. And that should enable you to be found under most circumstances. It's one of the things that you should always carry if you're in the mountains or the hills of the UK, along with an emergency bivvy bag. These are some of the pyrotechnic devices that can be used to make a distress signal. This is a handheld marine flare. This just burns at the end, it doesn't shoot off. They can be seen for quite a long distance. The burning magnesium inside burns very brightly, so you can even see it in daylight. First of all, we pull back here, and then twist, so that both the arrows are in alignment. The next thing we need to do is strike firmly at the base here, and this activates the flare. It's a good idea not to look straight into the flame because it's very bright. One of the more valuable skills of bushcraft is the ability to identify and to understand the trees and how they can be used. This is one of my favourite trees. It's a beech. Very easy to identify because of the smooth grey bark and the shape of the leaves. In the very early spring, when these leaves first come out, they're absolutely delicious. They can be used as an alternative to lettuce. But this time of year, they're so dark and fibrous, they really don't taste very good at all. Now, beech trees create one of the finest forests for bushcraft because there's very little undergrowth. So the tannin in the leaves and the dead leaves as it breaks down prevents any growth on the ground, and also the canopy during the summer months provides such a lot of shade you get very little light. So beech forests tend to be very clear and easy to work in. Now, beech wood is extensively used in the furniture industry. Anyone who goes to IKEA will have seen thousands of things made from beech, normally from Eastern Europe. The sycamore is a really common sight in the British countryside, but it's actually an import, probably from America. It provides one of the best sources of food for another American import, the grey squirrel. So you'll quite often find the bark of the sycamore tree scored and scratched and bitten through by grey squirrels. It really ruins it. Many people consider it to be a major pest because it's a self-seeder and you can find it all over the place. But I actually think it's beautiful, so I like to see it around. The wood of sycamore has been used for a long time to make utilitarian items like bowls and spoons. It's actually the traditional wood for making Welsh love spoons. The reason it makes such good eating utensils is because the wood has no toxic resins, so things like yew trees and holly trees would have a poisonous resin, whereas the sycamore doesn't taint the food in any way. This is a really useful tree called an elder. Some people call it a Judas tree because of the story in the Bible that said that Judas hung himself from it. But anyone who knows this tree would be able to say that if you tried to hang yourself from it, the chances are it would probably break because it's not the strongest of trees. Oak would be a much better choice. But it does have a very useful feature in that the stems of elder are filled with this pith material which runs down the inside of the stem. If we scoop that out, we end up with a hollow tube which can be used for all sorts of things, from making straws or musical instruments to using it for hand drills, for fire lighting. It's one of the best uses for it. It's also a source of elderflowers, which can be used to make elderflower cordial. Really, really nice mixed with wild strawberries. Or if we wait until the autumn time, we get elderberries, which of course you can use to make wine. This is one of the favourite native trees of the British countryside, the ash. It grows very tall, very distinctive from its light coloured bark. Ash trees are really useful for making tool handles or bows and arrows because it's so resistant to shock. It's also a very useful wood because it burns from green, so as firewood it's second to none. Trees are a valuable resource. Without them we wouldn't last very long ourselves, and a well-managed forest can provide us with everything we need. But they do need to be looked after for future generations. Many people without any bushcraft experience probably think that lighting a fire up against a tree is a perfectly good idea, and more than likely don't realise the damage it can do. But this tree has been so badly damaged, it'll probably die. We've already established how important a knife is for bushcraft, but it's also really important that your knife is kept as sharp as possible. My favourite way of doing that is to use a Japanese waterstone, which has a coarse side, which is the dark red, and the mustard coloured side is actually a much finer grit. Before a Japanese waterstone can be used, it has to be soaked in water. So we just put it in water for a couple of minutes. The water helps to prevent the pores of the stone from clogging up with pieces of metal, and it also helps to lubricate the blade so it runs smoothly over the top. After a couple of minutes we can take the stone out of the water, and the next thing we do is to use what's known as a Nagura stone. This is rubbed on the sharpening stone in order to create an abrasive paste. Once we've established our stone, it's wet and it has the paste on it, the next thing we need to do is to position the knife. Now this is a single beveled knife, and what I'm going to do is first of all place it flat on the stone and very carefully tilt the blade until the edge of the blade is flush with the top of the stone. Very carefully, with a firm but not too heavy motion, push the knife away from you, maintaining even pressure over the blade. As you get towards the tip, just lift slightly so that the tip of the blade also gets sharpened. If the stone looks like it's getting a little bit dry, sprinkle some more water on the top and carry on. You can really tell by the sound if you've got this right. It should be a very smooth sound. You can also look at the edge of the blade and see from where it's polished if you're sharpening the correct angle. Now to do the other way, I just reverse the exact same principle, bringing the blade towards me, under control, taking great care as always. Once we've done one side with the coarse stone, give the stone another soak, wipe off any paste. This side we'll be using the mustard coloured stone, which is the least coarse. This will give us a much finer edge, so we continue to sharpen the knife in exactly the same way, but this time the sound is very different. Because we're not using a coarse stone, it's more of a polishing action than an abrasive action. This gives us a very, very fine edge that we can use for all of our bushcraft tasks. The problem with the Japanese waterstone is that it is quite heavy. So unless I'm going somewhere where I'll be in close proximity to a vehicle, I'll normally take another option with me. This is a DMZ diamond hone, and this is used in much the same way, but it's a much lighter option. So by maintaining the same angle of edge, this just gives us an opportunity to hone the edge of our blade, and we can do the same thing the other way. The DMZ diamond sharpening steel has a steel plate which is impregnated with industrial diamonds. These lightweight sharpening steels are a very effective way of maintaining the edge on your knife while you're away from civilization. There are very few tasks in bushcraft that can be accomplished without the aid of a good sharp knife. You could, in an emergency, use a piece of broken glass or a flint, but a good, well-made knife definitely helps you a lot. Now, the knife I would choose for bushcraft would be something like this. About a 4-inch blade. You don't need a big Rambo knife with a 9-inch blade and a sawback edge and a hollow handle. No use at all. Something like that's far more useful. Also, I'd go for carbon steel. Now, carbon steel, although it will rust if you get it wet, it definitely holds a better edge and it's much easier to sharpen, so that's a really good plus point. A good solid handle. Wood is nice. You can also have antler, anything that's comfortable, that's the number one. Even synthetics are a good idea, as long as it fills your hand and it's comfortable to hold in a lot of different positions. That's great. This is my favorite. It's actually curly birch. Another thing, I would always go for a knife with a single beveled edge. Now, single beveled means that from the flat part of the blade here to the edge, you have a single change of angle. And this is very important for bushcraft. A lot of knives you'll buy, especially butcher's knives and general purpose knives, will have a 2 beveled edge, which means that from the flat part here, you have 1 change of angle, and then just before the edge, you have an extra change of angle. That makes all the difference. A single beveled edge can be sharpened to an absolute razor sharpness, sharp enough to shave the hairs on your arm. And for bushcraft, that's exactly what you need. Another thing that's really important is to have a good case. So the knife you choose should always come with a very good case. It can be made of leather, plastic, even wood, as long as it does the job of keeping your knife safe. If the case isn't up to the job, it could come through and you could injure yourself. So always make sure, as well as checking the knife over, have a really good look at the case and see that it's up to the job. Right, now using the knife. There are several ways that we'll use a knife, but we're just going to look at a few to begin with. Now, these are the very basics. What I want to do is make a point on this stick. So treating the stick as if it's a tent peg, what I'd like to do is make a point. So I'll take my knife and I'll hold it in this very firm fist grip, and I keep my arm almost locked out. Now, the reason I do that is because I don't want this to move. This arm stays where it is, so the knife stays in exactly this position. Now I put the blade right on the piece of wood where I'd like to start cutting, and I pull. I'm actually using my left arm and I'm pulling backwards. Very much like this. This gives me a huge amount of power and a lot of control over the blade. Because the blade isn't moving, it means that I can maintain the angle that I want to keep. If I do it this way, I'm constantly changing angle. Another point about carving, jarring the elbow like this, is it can cause you to have tennis elbow. Something I did to myself years ago before anyone showed me a better way of doing it. So save yourself a lot of pain and carve this way. And as you can see, I've got a huge amount of control over that blade, and I can just keep turning the piece of wood, taking very small shavings off as I go. And there we have it, that's a point. Right, another thing we might want to do is to make a notch, especially if this is to be a tent peg. I need a notch so that the piece of string I tie to, or the tent guy lines, won't come undone. So I hold the knife in a slightly different way. This time I put my thumb on the back of the blade. My other thumb goes in front, and using both thumbs, I push. So I'm pushing the blade and taking very fine slivers of wood away as I go. You notice that every time I cut, I'm cutting away from myself. At no time will you see me cutting in the direction of my hand. And there we have a notch. Now, a notch can be useful for anything from making a pot hanger to hold a billy can over a fire to make a cup of tea, a tent peg, as we have here, or it can be used as the trigger mechanism for a trap, in which case we would link 2 of these together and use that to make the trap, something we'll cover later on in the series. Another technique, which I'm going to have to go down low for, is to hold the knife in the soft part. So if you feel where your kneecap is, and you'll feel a soft section just below. If you put the back of your knife into that soft section, then it gives you a lot of control. You can actually use that knife in a much more controlled way, and you can peel the bark, you can make feather sticks, and the knife doesn't move. It's all under the control of your knee. There you go. Those are 3 very useful techniques for carving using a knife. There are lots more, but if you can master those few, you'll definitely be a long way to becoming a good bushman. of the most difficult environments to survive in is the hotel room. Premier travel inns can be a hive of danger and hidden obstacles. But if you know where to look, you can always find the essentials of life. The most important things to find: water. We have to find a water supply. So luckily I brought my canteen with me. Follow me through here. One of the biggest challenges facing the hotel survivor is finding a suitable source of drinking water. Luckily, we have one right here. Perfect supply of drinking water. Just perfect to drink. Next thing we need to find is a source of food. Just where to look. Follow me. As well as providing a great habitat for insects and small mammals, the cavity under a hotel bed can be a source of amazing opportunities for food, like this sock. Now, socks, surprisingly enough, contain a lot of dead skin, which is an excellent source of protein. So boiling this up makes a fantastic soup. So that's our first little start, great little snack to get started with. Okay, let's see what else we can find. Now that we've checked under the bed, we have to see what other sources of food we can find. I've got an idea. Let's have a look over here. By turning the bedside lamp on and leaving the window open, we can attract moths. Now, moths will fly in through the open window, up inside here, where they'll bounce around like this, thinking that the light is the moon. If we hold a pillow underneath here, we can catch the moths as they die and cook them up into a tasty soup. Another really good source of food in a hotel room are these things. Now, every hotel room has a little condiment set like this, and you have a little biscuit, which is a very, very good source of carbohydrate, and also you have these little sachets of milk. This is fresh milk, which is actually very rich in protein, so that's a really good source of food. And also we have some sugar, and of course the most important thing in the world, some tea and some coffee as well. Great. So that's everything we need, but the true survivor never goes anywhere without being prepared, so I brought some army rations with me just in case. So we have, all hotel rooms have these kettles. Fantastic, you can use them to make tea or boil in the bag army rations. Brilliant. Okay, so kettle's boiled, off we go. Now what we need to do, whack our army rations in the sink like this, chuck on the boiling water, and just leave it to cook for a while. Another very useful thing in the bathroom is toilet paper. So as well as using it as toilet paper, we all know what that's for, you can also use it for tinder. So one of the most useful firelighters you can find in the bathroom. You could also use it to write messages on, which you could lower down to the lower floors of the hotel in order to attract attention. While our dinner's cooking, we'll have a look at what other options we have. Now here we have a couple of pillows. Pillows can be ripped open and are an excellent source of tinder. So inside there you've got all the fibres that can be used to get a fire going. We've also got some coat hangers over here. They don't really come out. So see if I can get one out for you. These are the tricky ones. Oh yeah, now look at that. Now that can be used. See what we have here. We have our drill, and we have a hearth here. We can use this for friction firelighting. So maybe that's our next little project. So hotel friction firelighting. We haven't tried that yet. Fantastic stuff. So another thing we have here. Okay, got a couple of towels. Now towels, believe it or not, are one of the most useful things you can find in a hotel room because A, you can use them as insulation, so these can be used as a blanket, or towels can be used as a wound dressing, and unless you've chosen the environmentally friendly option of having your towels not washed every day, they're also quite clean, so you can use them to prevent infection in a cut. Brilliant stuff. That's also very important in a survival situation because an infection can actually kill you. I think dinner is just about done. Perfect. Oh yeah. This is one of the plants that's really worth knowing about. It's called meadowsweet, and it used to be used in houses back in the Middle Ages to fragrance the rooms. So they'd strew all the floor with these leaves, and that would give the room a really pleasant smell. And it does have a really sweet smell. It was also used to flavour mead, which is a honey wine. Now, from a survival and bushcraft perspective, its main use is a medicinal one. And if I just rummage around down here and pull some of the root out, I'll explain why. Now, that's just a little piece of the root. It actually grows quite a long way, but this is enough for us to have a little look at. Beautiful pink colour. And the smell, obviously you won't be able to smell this, but it just takes me straight back to childhood, because the smell of meadowsweet is exactly like the smell of germaline. So when you're 6 years old and you fall over and you cut your knee and your mum sticks germaline on your knee, that's exactly what this smells like. So it's a very useful antiseptic. You can either use it as a poultice by mashing this up and putting it on a wound, or maybe making an infusion with some warm water and using that as a wound wash. Another thing meadowsweet has is something called salicylic acid, which is better known as aspirin. So it can be used in infusion as a headache cure. Now this plant's called yarrow, and it's a useful medicinal herb. Very antiseptic. It can be used as an infusion, or it can be made into a poultice to put on a wound. So very good to know. Antiseptic plants are probably the most useful of the medicinal plants that we could find, because infection in a survival situation is very likely to be a problem. So the slightest cut, if it becomes infected, will cause you a problem. So knowing which plants can actually be used to prevent infection could save your life. Definitely worth bearing in mind. This is a really nice patch of scurvy grass here. One of the more useful plants to find on the seashore, called scurvy grass because it was very commonly kept aboard ship, pickled, to prevent the crew from coming down with scurvy. And it has a slightly unusual taste, slightly peppery, but not unpleasant at all. So worth knowing what to look for, even if it's just as a preventative against any deficiencies, and help to keep your immune system up. A very useful knot is a fisherman's knot. It's the knot we use to attach fishing line to fishing hooks, but this is scaled up so that we can see what's going on. And all you do is run it either through the eye of the hook or around a post, wrap around several times. I normally do this about 6 times if I'm putting a fishing line on, because it's so much thinner, and then run the line through the gap and pull it tight. Now that slides along, and the harder it's pulled, the tighter the knot gets, which means it can be really difficult to undo. If we want to make a knot that won't slip, a good one is the climber's knot, the figure 8. Firstly, make a figure 8 shape in the rope. This goes around the object you'd like to tie to, adjust it, and then follow around. So the remaining line follows the original figure 8 all the way around. And you end up with a very neat figure 8 shaped knot, which can be backed up with a stopper knot, which takes up any spare rope you have. This is an extremely strong knot. This is why it's used to attach climbers to their ropes. And the real advantage as well is that it won't slip. If you don't have to thread this knot through anything, you can achieve the same result by simply forming a figure 8 in the doubled up rope. That's a knot that won't slip, and you can just put it over anything and it'll hold it firm. If you need to lash 2 pieces of wood together, the most secure way is firstly tie a slip knot around 1 piece of wood. This is just our starting point. Then we begin by first wrapping one way and then the other. And you can do this very neatly and it gives you a lot more space to work with. So once we've wrapped around a few times, we can tension the whole thing up by wrapping the cord around the middle section. This really helps to pull everything into tension. And then the whole lot can be tied off, either with a permanent knot or a quick release one. Hello, caught me hard at work again. I'm at the Bushcraft and Survival Skills magazine Bush Camp at the Outdoor Show in Birmingham, NEC. We'll also be talking to some of the other stall holders about what they do and what makes the outdoors in Britain so great. And the next person I'll be speaking to is George Thompson, who runs Canadian Canoes.
These are all open canoes or Canadian canoes. They come in a variety of materials, as would have been made in the 19th century in the small canoe workshops of the northern United States, southern Canada. But without a doubt, the open canoe is the most versatile unpowered craft in the world.
I'm Olivia Beardsmore. I work for Bushcraft and Survival Skills magazine as the sub-editor, and I also represent Women in the Wild, and the aim is that we promote more women working, being involved in bushcraft, really, to dispel the myths that it's men out there that can only do bushcraft and survival skills.
Okay, so we're going to start making.
We also have about 3 or 4 female courses now run by female instructors out there, which is a great opportunity for women who might not feel comfortable perhaps going on courses where there are males just yet, and they can go on a women only course, build up their confidence so that they feel comfortable in a mixed environment.
We're at the stand of Airways Air Sports, and this is Andrew Rastall, who's going to tell us all about these amazing machines.
This machine actually only became legal in the UK April last year, and it's a single seat deregulated microlight is its official term. Actually what you've got is a paramotor engine and a trike that it's launched on.
Is it a very similar flying experience to a normal microlight?
It's a bit slower, but because it's slower it'll actually take off in a much shorter and land in a much shorter distance. So again, it's all about accessibility to flying, and if you're looking for barriers to flying, needing a long airstrip is a barrier. With this, I need 20 metres of grass, and I can land it literally in its own length. So when you land it, the wheels don't even rotate once, it just lands and stops. And it's causing a lot of people to look at how easy it is to go and do something like this. For the whole package, you're only talking a couple of £1,000 to have all of it and to be qualified to go and fly it.
I've always loved the outdoors myself. I'm a keen walker and enjoy sort of being outdoors. And one weekend, all of my friends went home to their respective families, and I wanted to go walking. So I had a look on the internet to try and find some way of going walking, and I couldn't find anywhere for singles to actually come together and walk. So before I knew it, and it sort of took over itself, I ended up creating a business, The Date Outdoors. So we do all sorts of things now, from cycling, whitewater rafting, orienteering, hiking, mountaineering, just about everything. Climbing, we do holidays overseas and sort of longer breaks in the UK. So it really has expanded from my initial idea, which was just to get out there and get people enjoying a healthy lifestyle.
Brilliant, thanks very much for that. This is wood sorrel, which tastes just like apple peel. A really refreshing nibble when you're walking in the countryside. So here we have one of my favourite little woodland survival snacks, the pig nut. And the interesting thing about the pig nut is that you have to be very careful when you dig down to find the root, which is what we call the pig nut. So make yourself a little digging stick, and you have to very carefully follow the stem down. Now it goes very, very thin as it gets to the bottom. That is a very good one. Oh yeah. So first of all, wipe the mud away. Now, some people say these taste like a cross between a chestnut and a radish. It's one of the few sources of carbohydrates you'll find in the wild. It's all beautifully wrapped by nature in its very own form of packaging. The hawthorn is one of the most useful of our woodland trees. This time of year, we can pick the flowers and the youngest leaves and make something that was known in the countryside as farmer's bread, or bread and cheese. This plant we have here is called ramson, or wild garlic. Now the parts that are useful to us are the leaves, which have a very strong garlic flavour, or the flowers, which are really pretty and can be used to decorate a salad. But I think the most useful part is these small seeds here. So just underneath the flowers you have these tiny seeds, and they're probably the strongest of all the parts of the plant as far as garlic's concerned. So I like to use these when I'm cooking. One plant that needs absolutely no introduction is this one, the stinging nettle. Now, if you reach down from above and just grab the top few leaves, it doesn't normally sting you. So this is the part that we find the most useful. Forget the rest of it. All these leaves, the big ones down here, they've gone far too old, really fibrous, not worth worrying about. But these top leaves are absolutely ideal for cooking or for making tea. Now, nettles have been associated with a lot of health benefits, mainly as a blood purification or as a general tonic. It's actually very rich in iron, so it's a really good food for people who are anemic. And as a survival food, it definitely has its place. What I normally do is get about 10 of these, put them in a mug, add some hot water, leave it for about 5 minutes, and then you've got your nettle infusion or nettle tea. Now then, one of our main senses is our sight. As humans in the urban world, we rely on sight more than anything else. But in nature, other senses come to the forefront. Sense of smell, hearing, and also a sixth sense that nobody really understands. Now Chris has been blindfolded, so he's reliant on his sense of sound. And the rest of the team are sneaking up, trying to get as close to him as they can without getting shot with a water pistol. And this lot have had a great day out in the woods. We've eaten some bugs, built some shelters, learnt to use knives, and all in all we've had a really good day. A video about bushcraft skills is probably the last place you'd expect to find information about men's grooming and shaving. After all, the majority of male bushcraft enthusiasts have beards, and quite a few of the female ones too. But the use of a cutthroat razor is definitely one of the most advanced uses of a sharp blade. If you can use this to shave effectively, then you really can consider yourself to be the master of a blade. Now the important thing when we're using a Japanese water stone is to soak it in water long enough so that the stone has actually absorbed all the moisture it can. Now this water acts as a lubricant and it allows the blade to slide over the surface so that it doesn't jar and it doesn't get any nicks and damage to the blade. Now this is the method that we use to hone the blade, so it's the first step in the sharpening process. Now without applying much downward pressure at all, just enough to hold it in place, slide the blade forwards and off, and then reverse it, so go the other way, sliding down the hone and off the edge. Really applying very little downward pressure because we really want this to slide along the surface without any snagging. And this is far more important even than the edge that we have on our survival knives or our bushcraft knives, because we need this edge to be so perfect in order for it to shave effectively that we really can't afford any damage or any blunt spots on this blade. Now before we can even start shaving, the first thing we need to do is wash with hot water and soap. This helps to clean up and prevent any infection in the stubble, and it also starts the process of lifting the hairs and softening the hairs ready for shaving. So very important to use hot water for this and really get into the stubble, make sure it's all cleaned up. Now the grooming products, you can spend a fortune on this stuff. You've got creams and potions and aftershave and lotions and all sorts of things, but essentially all you really need is a brush, which you use to gain a lather. Now traditionally these are always badger hair brushes. Badger hair is the best texture brush. It helps to lift the hairs, gets the foam right underneath the stubble, so it rises each hair up and allows it to be cut much more easily. So a badger hair brush is a very, very useful thing. So make sure you cover the entire beard area, because anywhere that doesn't have shaving foam on it will act as a stopper and the blade will actually snag and it won't run smoothly. Now the important thing when we're using the strop is to get it in a position so that we can pull it firmly in order to maintain a flat surface here, because if this is allowed to bow, it just rounds off the edge of the blade, so that's no good at all. Now what we do first of all, place the spine of the blade on the strop, tilt it as we did with the hone, and then pull back. So always maintaining the same angle. Now I know it looks very impressive when you see it in the films and they do this really fast, but there's not much to be gained. If you do it slowly and more precisely, you'll get a much finer edge. And as I described, what we're aiming to do here is to realign the burrs at the edge of the blade, and that will allow the edge to cut the hairs with no resistance at all. Starting off, always aim to maintain tension on the face, and this helps to allow the blade to slide cleanly over the skin. So you really have to keep that skin tensioned up. The hairs on your face grow in different directions, and we should always shave in the direction that the grain grows, which is to cut in the direction that the hair is growing. On your face, the hair is growing in a downwards angle, so we cut in a downward motion. But on your neck, it's growing in an upward angle, so we always cut upwards. That can be quite tricky, so practice makes perfect. Now, one thing I realized when I first started shaving like this is why people always used to grow moustaches, because the moustache area is probably the most difficult bit to do, and you really need to keep the angle of the blade very steep. So to get into here, you're at about an 80-degree angle just under the nose. And then just finish off by just taking off any pieces of stubble that you may have missed. And that's definitely the closest shave in the woods. And in this episode of the A to Z of Bushcraft, we'll be covering the subject of S for shelter. Now the importance of shelter is not to be underestimated. It's vital to keep the elements at bay and to make us comfortable in our camp. The first thing I do when I'm looking for somewhere to pitch camp is to check up in the trees. Always look out for any dead branches that could fall and injure you in the night. Even a very small stick falling from a great height can cause a lot of injury, so by looking up, checking for any dead branches, anything without any leaves on it should be viewed as suspicious, and the trees above me now look pretty good. It's definitely worth bearing in mind beech trees and sometimes ash trees have a tendency to drop their limbs without warning, so try and avoid any obviously overhanging, very heavy looking branches. This is a shelter tarp, or what some people call a basher. Now we want the ridged line to be as tight as possible, so the best way I've found to do that is to wrap it around a tree, pull it one way, then wrap it around the ridge line again and pull it once more. And then just to finish up, a few wraps around the ridge line and finish off with a quick release knot. These tarps, or bashers as the army call them, are made out of waterproof nylon material, so they're very light. They also have silicone proofing over all the seams, so they shed water, and the whole thing is printed in DPM, which is disruptive pattern material. This enables you to stay completely invisible in woodland, which is very handy if you don't want to be found. And importantly, it's very robust. It's designed, it can be used as an emergency stretcher, so it's very tough. Also not too heavy, which makes it ideal, and it has all these perfectly situated loops and guying points so that we can adjust it in lots of different ways. Now the best way I've found to adjust the ridge line is to use what we call prusik knots. Now these were invented for climbers to use to ascend ropes if they fell into a crevasse or if they needed to climb a fixed line. A prusik knot uses a thinner piece of cord than the main rope. This is then wrapped around the main rope and it works like a fist, and the more pressure that's put on it, the tighter it grips. So we can use this to adjust the guy lines very tightly just by pulling it along, and it'll hold firmly. That's great. The next thing I need to do is to guy out the corners. So just pull it through, wrap around a couple of times, and then just poke the loop through, tighten it up, and that's good. And then to release it, just give it a sharp pull there, and the whole thing comes undone. Well, a very good tip is to use the point, the angle of the corner, to direct which way the guy lines need to go. I prefer to keep my guy lines separate, which gives me a bit more flexibility. It's a good idea to exploit any natural features you can in order to guy out the tarpaulin effectively. You should only really need to cover the corners, but if you have the time, it's always worth putting a few extra in just to maintain as much tension as possible. And then we run this line, this corner line, out to a conveniently situated beech tree. Same thing again, a couple of wraps around the tree, a nice quick release knot. That's fine, no one's going to trip over that. If we can't find a tree in a suitable position or any other natural object, making a peg is the next best thing. Always make sure you have your tarpaulin guyed out as well as you possibly can. And this is our home for the night. It should allow any rain that falls on us to run off. The only thing I'd consider doing if the winds were high is to lower these just to afford me a little bit more of a windbreak, but the conditions the way they are at the moment, the rain seems to be coming straight down, so just a roof like this should be absolutely perfect. Now normally I'd be looking for a nice flat piece of ground with no rocks, no roots, nothing that's going to keep me awake at night. But today I've brought some useful equipment with me that will prevent me even having to worry about that. It's called a hammock. Most of you have seen one, but the latest types are absolutely ideal for bushcraft and survival use. I've left one side of my tarp open just so that you can see what I'm doing here. I always finish it off with just a simple bow knot. So you don't have to do anything fancy, just a straightforward bow like you're doing up your shoelaces. And as long as it's wrapped around the tree a few times, that shouldn't cause you any problems. Pull the hammock out, take it to another tree, and pull it as tight as possible. If you have any sags in it, you'll have a pretty uncomfortable night. You also need to look along it just to make sure it's perfectly level. Otherwise, you'll slide either to one end or the other during the night. Wrap around the tree once more and finish off with a bow. I'm sure most of you have seen the types of hammocks that you get in Mexico or Thailand that are made from a net material. Those are great if you just want to sit out in your garden, have a few cold beers, perfect. But if you want to spend some time out in the woods and sleep soundly, something like this is far better. It's made from double layer nylon, which means that insects can't bite through it. If you're using a hammock in cold weather, you definitely need to use an insulation mat, something like a thermarest or a carry mat in between the two layers of nylon, and this will insulate you against the cold air. Otherwise your sleeping bag gets compressed and you'll have a pretty cold night. Just as comfortable as your own bed at home. Oh, that's really not too bad. One of the more controversial aspects of bushcraft is the skill of trapping. And the reason it's so controversial is, of course, because it causes considerable suffering to the animals that you're trying to catch. but in a survival situation, your self-preservation must take precedence. That said, there's no excuse for prolonging the agony of an animal unnecessarily, so the traps I'm going to show you today definitely have to be checked as often as possible in order to make sure that you find out if there's an animal in it as soon as possible and can put them out of their misery. Now the first thing you need to do if you're planning on learning how to trap is to learn how to track first of all, knowing where the animals are, knowing their habitats and how to find them. Here we have a run, quite possibly a rabbit run. It's running through here to the fields that are just over there. One of the simplest forms of trap is the snare. You can buy them ready-made or you can make them yourself. So as long as you have some stiff brass wire, like this stuff, you can normally get it in hardware stores as picture hanging wire. And what we need to do is to form it into a slipping knot. The snare should be positioned at the most appropriate height for a rabbit. In this case, about 2 to 3 fingers up from the ground. So I'm just going to bend the wire. And I'm going to use a small twig just to support it into that position. Small pieces of wood just to create a diversion, so just to encourage the rabbit or whatever I'm trying to catch to go into that snare. So as our rabbit comes through here, staying low to go under the log, he comes through, hopefully he hasn't noticed anything's amiss, and his head should go through there, and as his head goes through, it'll tighten up. Now the problem with natural cord or any kind of string as opposed to wire is that it doesn't hold its form very well. So we need to cheat a little bit and use some twigs and various other things to hold it in position. So we have our notch here, and this conveniently situated sapling can be pulled down, and we'll attach this like so. So we're just measuring the distance now. We're going to get a bit of tension on here. Now then we need to put our snare into the same position that we had the wire snare in. But to do that, we're going to need to use more little twigs just to support it. So our rabbit comes through here, his head comes through there, and as he starts to struggle, pulls the peg, and that keeps the tension on the string. So now he's got the tension of the sapling pulling against him, so as he struggles, it keeps the tension on the rope and stops it coming off from around his neck. So it's an effective method, tried and tested, an old poacher's trick. This is a method that would be considered poaching under all but the most extreme survival situations. So not something you'd want to do just because you're feeling peckish, but in a real survival situation, a method like this could help to keep you fed. What we're looking for is a nice straight piece of hazel. Hazel being a really good renewable wood, and if we cut it correctly, it'll regrow and we'll get lots of new shoots to replace the ones we've cut down. It's called coppicing. So we're looking for a long straight piece of hazel. That looks ideal there, but we also have another feature that's useful to us, and that is the fact that it has a crook in it there. Now we can use that in several different ways for the support to suspend the pot over the fire, and also for the pot hanger itself. So there we have our main support, and by cutting it just here, and then once here, we have a Y-shaped piece which is used as a support. So we've positioned the Y-shaped support next to the fire, make sure that's very secure. Next thing we need to do is to get this long supporting pole and lay it on the Y-shaped piece. This gives us the exact balance position so that it doesn't twist. And that will be used as our hook so we can make an adjustable pot stand. Now I'm going to just cut a little cross into this piece of timber, sharp tap that side, just take away some of the surplus material. What we're looking for is something like a bird's beak, so that this section here protrudes out and scoops in just a little bit. So I'm going to take that a little bit further. So my favourite wood for any kind of eating utensil is hazel. So we're going to make a little fork, just a field expedient means of eating. And then what we're going to do is just split this hazel using the tip of our knife. And that's a handy way to make a fork very quickly in the woods. For this episode of the A to Z of Bushcraft, we'll be looking at V for vitality. And in the first 3 weeks of March, the sap starts to rise up the birch tree. The sap is an incredibly rich source of vitamin C, and if we drink it, it helps to revitalise us. So for thousands of years, people have drank this sap in order to restore the balance after a long winter and give themselves the necessary vitamins to boost their immune system and really get themselves back on track for the new year. You start to see the buds forming on the ends of the twigs, and that's a sign that the sap is starting to rise. Now you only have a very short window of opportunity to do this, but if you drill a neat hole into the tree, you can collect some of the sap as it flows through the tree. And that sap is very rich in sugar and minerals and vitamin C. It's a traditional method, driving the drill bit into the wood by hand. It's a method that would have been used for centuries. The traditionalists among you will absolutely hate me for this, but the method I prefer to use is a cordless drill. Because a cordless drill is a nice fast tool that creates a very, very clean hole in the tree. Now a tree like this should produce quite a few litres of sap. A large demijohn like this is really worth having because you don't want a small container that will overflow. We're going to make the hole in the tree at a slightly upward angle, so I'm holding the drill so that I can drill in a slightly upward motion. And then we're going to put our piping into there, so you need to have a reasonably close fit. This is a low expense, lightweight option, so just use old water bottles. 2 litre are great. Then maybe you need to check them a little bit more often than a demijohn because they're that bit smaller. But if you strap them around the tree, it puts tension on the pipe, which helps to prevent leaks around it, and you get a really nice flow rate as well. And this sap is an incredibly rich source of vitamins and nutrients, which the tree uses in order to start its new season. So it starts all the buds and the leaves, and this is the fuel that gets everything going. And before we leave the tree, we have to make sure that we seal up the hole. Now the reason for that is because the tree will effectively bleed to death if we don't, and also it allows infection into the bark. So what we need to do is cut some nice pieces of hazel, the same diameter or slightly larger than the diameter of the hole that we've drilled in the tree, and we need to cut some pegs. Now that's properly sealed off so it can't leak anymore, and also it prevents infection getting into the tree, and the tree will now scab over, cover that, and it'll be good for next year. So that's a perfectly sealed tapping hole, and that's the proper way to tap birch sap. And today I'll be showing you how to make one of these. It's a willow whistle made from one piece of willow. First thing we need to do is to find a nice piece of straight willow with as few knots as possible. Cut it off about that length. Next thing we need to do is to bruise the bark all over, and this helps to separate the inner from the outer layers. What I'm going to do is just give it a good twist. So if you look now, the outer part has come away from the inner part. So the next thing I need to do is to cut the mouthpiece for the whistle. Make a little smiley face. Now this is the part that requires extra special delicate hands. It's just to remove this bark. No pressure. And there we have it. Okay, so we've removed the outer piece. And that's the inner piece, so my next job is to remove as much of this material as I can to create the sound chamber. Next thing I need to put the bark back on. Really careful you don't break it. And then we have a whistle. this episode of the A to Z of Bushcraft, we've travelled to Sweden to visit the Gränsforsbruks axe forge. Gränsforsbruks have been making axes for over 100 years, and the quality of their axes has made them a first choice for bushcraft enthusiasts all over the world. Each axe is hand forged and stamped with the maker's initials as a seal of quality. Next door to the forge is Sweden's only axe museum, which contains some of the best examples of axe production, from Stone Age flint axes and Viking battle axes through to modern wood splitting and crafting tools. You can see where the good steel has been added on. It's been welded to the poorer quality steel. So back in the days when quality steel was difficult to make, that would be the option. You get your good high temper steel welded on to the lower temper steel here, and then once this piece is worn out, you could take it to your blacksmith and he could add a new piece on. Lars Anander is one of the world's most experienced blacksmiths, so this will be a great opportunity to learn the ancient skill of knife forging from someone with over 30 years experience. This is the blacksmith's method of cutting kindling using a hammer and a special tool called a hardy fuller. It's a lot safer than using a hatchet or an axe. The first step in the process is learning how to light and control the heat in the forge. Paper and wood are used to get things started, and then we add the main fuel, known as coke. By increasing or reducing the airflow into the forge, we can regulate the heat precisely. A stack of different steels such as carbon steel and nickel steel are heated to a temperature of over 1000 degrees centigrade. This shows as a bright yellow colour. It's quite tricky at first to avoid overheating the metal, which causes it to burn like a sparkler. When the steel is hot enough, it's taken from the heat and beaten using a hammer. Borax is sprinkled over the surface to draw impurities from the steel. This process welds the stack of steel into one solid piece. And by repeatedly beating the steel, it's drawn out to approximately twice its length. Next, we bend the piece of steel over the side of the anvil to facilitate the first fold. The more folds in the steel, the more intricate the finished pattern will be. A special tool is used to shape the tang or handle of the blade. Different methods, such as cutting notches or twisting the steel, form a unique pattern in the steel. That seems to be working. So, I've cut all my grooves, and now we have to heat it up again, flatten it all back out, and hopefully that'll give us a nice pattern. The blade is then shaped and ground before being hardened and tempered. The hardening process is achieved by heating the steel to a bright cherry red colour, approximately 800 degrees centigrade. It is then quenched in oil. Tempering is used to reduce the hardness of the blade and prevent it from breaking in use. This is also the stage where the edge of the blade is formed. Typically, knives from Sweden have a Scandinavian or Scandi edge. This is a single bevel edge with a flat grind and is considered by many to be perfect for bushcraft. The blade is polished before being immersed in a container of sulfuric acid for several hours. The acid eats into the steel and reveals the Damascus pattern by exposing the bright nickel layers underneath. A final polish completes the process. Knives with patterned blades were once traded in Damascus, hence the name. Originally, the folding process was used to improve the strength of blades made with inferior quality steel. The pattern was simply a byproduct of this process. I'm really pleased with the result. I mean, this one here I'm pretty sure will be a fantastic bush knife, so just can't wait to put a handle on that and we'll test it out and see how good it is. It's the only person I can blame if it's not very good is myself, because I made it. Probably the most proud I've been ever, I think. This is Andrew Price reporting from some woods in the middle of Norway, on his own, with no one to hold the camera. And at the moment I'm in Norway, and we've decided to call this video Norway the Hard Way, because we don't have a lot of the equipment that you really should have to come into very, very deep snow like this. So skis, snowshoes, all those sorts of things would normally be considered essential. But just as an experiment, I thought we'd try out how I can come into these woods without the equipment that would normally be necessary and see how I get on. So at the moment the priority is to build a camp that I can use to survive the night. Now, as you can see, we have my shelter right behind me here. Now it's a tarp shelter, it's not ideal for this sort of circumstance. Now the reason for that is because if it snows heavily during the night, the snow will build up on this and it'll probably collapse. So at some point in the night I may have to readjust this, but it'll do for now. It'll keep any falling snow off the trees away while I light my fire. So in a spruce forest like this, one of the best places to find dry, usable kindling is on the lower reaches of the tree, because where the sunlight doesn't reach, the branches die off and you have a lot of these young twigs which have died and dried off because they're away from the ground and they're perfectly dry and usable as kindling. So that's what we'll do. We'll just start breaking a few of these off, give them a tap, get the snow off first of all. The first step to lighting a fire in winter is to clear the snow away so that we're down to the level of earth. This is our old friend the silver birch. The loose bark is highly flammable and one of nature's most effective fire lighting materials. Next I build a platform of dried twigs about thumb thickness on which I'll light the fire. Building an emergency shelter is the second most important skill for winter survival. I start by cutting a strong supporting pole, which will form the main ridge of the shelter. Building a raised bed will insulate you from the ground and improve your prospects of a good night's sleep. The shelter and bed are covered with spruce boughs which improve the insulation. A long fire using parallel logs is the most effective method of heating the shelter through the night. Now I have a fire going, I've had a cup of tea, I've had some food, and I'm starting to feel a little bit more like myself, and I'm starting to feel as though I'm becoming a part of the woodland again, and that's the kind of the feeling that you need to get. That's what we call getting into the zone. Morning. So just woken up, good night's sleep. This is the shelter I built. So don't know if you can see it very well. Supported at one end. Covered in spruce, mostly birch built with a raised bed. Now I'm cheating a little bit because I have a sleeping bag with me and a bivvy bag and a roll mat, so I had a really comfortable night, but this would have been a survivable night quite easily just by keeping the fire going, and that would have been fine. Even though we have a perfect shelter above us and a wood stove, unless we have some insulation underneath us, we still get cold. So something like this. It's a reindeer skin rug, still used in Finland and Sweden, the perfect way to insulate yourself from cold ground. Now the reason they're so good is because each individual hair on this skin is actually hollow and it traps a layer of warm air. Now we can then move on to the more modern approach. This is a choice of most backpackers these days. It's called a thermarest. There are other manufacturers that make them, but the thermarest is actually a self-inflating mattress. So it has a foam layer on the inside, nylon on the outside, and by opening this valve here we allow air in, and that, once it's closed up again, that traps a layer of air which insulates it from the ground. It's also one of the most comfortable beds that you can have in the outdoors as well. Far preferable to the old-fashioned camping mattresses which inflate really thickly. The other option is the cheapest option. Something that's been around for a long time now is close cell foam. Now this is a roll mat, sometimes called a carry mat, but made by quite a few different manufacturers. Now close cell foam is a very, very dense foam mat which gives us pretty good insulation, actually very good insulation, but a much more lightweight option if you're going backpacking or something like that. A really good piece of kit. We just need to think about what sort of sleeping bag we use. Now, traditionally people use blankets, but the obvious problem with blankets is firstly that they're very heavy. Also, a blanket doesn't enclose you all the way around, so modern sleeping bags are by far the best option. This is a modern mummy-shaped sleeping bag, which has a synthetic, high-tech insulation that keeps us warm even when it's wet. Now down, which is the traditional fabric for very warm sleeping bags, is fine if you're going to keep it dry. So it's great if you're mountaineering and you can guarantee you're not going to get it wet. But feather down does lose all its insulation properties when it's wet, whereas something with synthetic materials like this is a much better option. I always prefer a central zip, which means that we can get out just by pulling open the front, and we can escape that way. So if there's a problem, we have to get up quickly in the middle of the night. That's a really good option.
Where the wind blows, where the river meets the sea, I'll be waiting for the day when you come back to me. I'll be waiting, cut myself a slice of time when the wind blows, when the river meets the sea.